What does it mean to be relentless? Is it a state of mind or just about getting results? Does it mean not settling for just being good or even great, but about striving to be the best? Or does it mean never giving up, but being willing to adapt along the way? For Kay Yoder, Vice President of Environmental Health, Safety, Security, and Business Continuity at Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits, being relentless is simply a way of life. Kay's passion and drive for safety comes from a background forged in science, technology, and engineering, which might lead you to think Kay sees safety as all about the regulations and the numbers, a very methodical approach. But while being able to measure the impact of safety programs is critical, Kay understands that employee engagement and participation are the factors that really move the programs forward, and that driving engagement means reinforcing the right messaging and continually coaching people to keep safety top of mind, hoping that eventually the person catches on. Being relentless. For Kay, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing an employee's attitude change over time, and the student becomes the coach. Here's my conversation with Kay Yoder, a leader protecting both the workers and the company through a relentless approach to safety.
I basically see myself as a strategic environmental health and safety leader. I've had 25 years of global experience helping companies improve their safety performance, reducing risk, ensure regulatory compliance, and sometimes implementing sustainability initiatives into their existing business practices. I lead the corporate EHS, DOT, business continuity issues with the intent to protect the workers as well as the company. And I'm responsible to set the vision and drive EHS excellence across all the U.S. divisions, including Canada business. And on a daily basis, I champion those initiatives to support Southern Glazer's commitment. We want to provide a safe working condition for our employees, our contractors, our vendors, our customers, and we want to protect the environment and be good neighbors in the communities in which we operate.
I noticed that you originally studied biomedical engineering back at Tulane. What was it about that field early on in your career that got you excited?
Actually, I originally studied pharmacy at Butler University, and I changed my major to nuclear medicine during my sophomore year there. I was very passionate about helping people, and I thought the healthcare industry was a good fit for me. But once I changed my major, my father expressed concern over my choice of profession. It was then that I learned that earlier in his career, my father built one of the very first linear accelerators at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut, which is where I grew up. His concern stemmed from the fact that not much was known about the nuclear industry and about radiation exposure. And he knew of my passion for health and safety, and it was him that suggested I consider biomedical engineering. And that's when I went to Tulane after I had graduated in nuclear medicine from Butler, and then I went into biomedical engineering. I kind of hoped that when I graduated, I would work for a company designing or implementing new or improved technology, things that would enhance human lives, things like pacemakers, knee and hip replacements, artificial limbs, medical equipment. But honestly, by the time I graduated, I realized I was more of a people person, and sitting in a lab testing pacemakers or working on a computer all day, doing research, it really wasn't as appealing to me.
But you did gravitate pretty early on to more auditing and compliance roles. How did your background set you up for that kind of focus?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because of my engineering degree and in conjunction with my nuclear medicine knowledge, I was recruited by Siemens Medical. They were a prominent maker of medical diagnostic equipment. So I was hired by their nuclear imaging division, where I taught technicians across the U.S. how to use their diagnostic imaging equipment in hospital radiology departments. And when needed, I was able to service the equipment. So it was kind of like the perfect blend of interacting with people while using the science and technology at the same time.
You've spent a lot of your career in the pharmaceutical industry, but you're currently part, as you mentioned, of the team at Southern Glazers, which is the largest beer, wine, and spirits distributor. So have you seen any differences between how a pharmaceutical company views safety and the way it's viewed in the beverage industry?
Not really. I mean, safety is a very broad field. We all have to follow the same standards put forth by OSHA or EPA, and there's similarities in evaluation of hazards and risk mitigation solutions across all industries. The only difference I see is that they're completely different businesses, obviously, but the specific work environments or the associated hazards are different. But when it comes to safety, no matter what the industry, the most important goal is the well-being and safety of the company's most important asset, which is their employees.
So I just wonder, how do you define safety?
Safety, as it relates to my role, is to protect the company assets. That includes our people, our products, our properties, our reputation. Being a leader in safety is an opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of others. And it's the perfect marriage between the technical and the soft skills, as I mentioned earlier. You get the opportunity to develop both sides of your brain by helping companies advance their safety programs, assuring employees, return home safely to their families every day. I know that sounds like the ideal job, but it's not always that easy. You must be relentless with your engagement and messaging and continually coach people to keep safety top of mind, hoping that the person catches on. And then I can tell you that there's nothing more rewarding than when you see how a manager's attitude changes over time. And then they take over your coaching role to others. That's the best. It's the best feeling in the world.
I imagine it would be. So how do you keep employees engaged and thinking about safety? You mentioned it's a relentless task. What sorts of things are you doing?
It is relentless. So to keep the employees engaged is communication. So they have to understand the why. If the employee doesn't understand the why, then to them, it's just something else you're telling them they have to do versus something they want to do. But generally, when they understand the why, it's much more meaningful to them. So just put programs in place that engage the employee, listen to their feedback, get to know them, understand their processes. Some of the things that we do, we try to put out a weekly safety message that is applicable to our sales division and the people that are servicing the accounts, as well as operations and the people who are loading cases, working in the warehouse, the drivers. We put out a message every week that they can use in toolbox talks that would be relevant. And then we also put out something called an incident sharing, which is something that happened at one location that they can learn from. We don't say where it happened so that there's no name calling or finger pointing, if you will. We just want people to understand that these things do happen. You're not the only one. And please share this with your employees during their pre-shift meeting so that they understand that it's happened. And take 2 minutes and reevaluate your own situation, because we don't want this to happen to you. And then the other thing that we've done is we've put a campaign called Safety Matters at Work and at Home. And it is basically a collection of stories, and we've been putting them out one every 6 weeks since about 2017. It's a poster that goes out, and it is why safety matters to me. It's an employee who was hurt on the job, who has come back to work and has offered to tell their story about how their injury occurred, what choice they made that led to the situation, and why they appreciate their role. And many of them will say, don't do what I did, or think twice, or I now take every precaution possible, or you might not like me because I'm the guy that's going to stop you from doing what I did. It's very impactful, some of these stories, because it's not just at work, but the at-home component, because in many cases, when you have a serious injury, it significantly impacts your family. Sometimes they're going to have to care for you. Sometimes it's seeing your children having to give you a bath because you've been covered head to toe in burns. So it is a very impactful story written by the employee themselves and then published. And that has gotten a lot of traction, because in many locations, it might be someone who you've been working with for 2 years, but you didn't know that happened because they don't talk about it. So I encourage everyone to know who the people are at their location that have injuries, get them to talk about it, have them lead the toolbox talk with the other employees, because they're passionate. Now that something has happened, turn their life around, they become the safety leaders.
Is there a particular story that really stood out for you?
They all hit me in the heart. But one individual in particular was a driver manager, still works for us. And he was taking a route for a driver early in the morning, 5:30, and, 2-lane road. There were some Jersey barriers, which is the concrete barrier along the side of the road where they were doing some construction. And someone jumped out in front of him and basically committed suicide. And when I talked to the individual, he said, when the person jumped out, his face was facing my headlights. He had a navy blue or a black hoodie on. I can still see his face today. There was nothing he could do to prevent this. This wasn't an injury of his own. It was a driver experience. And he was exonerated. There was a huge investigation by the police, and they determined that the individual took their own life. But it was at the mercy of our driver. And he said it affected his whole life. I mean, he had young children, teenage years. He's trying to teach his kids to drive. His own family makes fun of him because he can't drive in that lane. He can't drive on the right side of the road anymore. And they say he drives like a grandmother, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but as someone who's elderly, right? And he said, he had a lot of issues, saw EAP and difficult from driving. And now he's in a management role for us, but he does not drive for us. So, and at his choice, but, he will be the first to tell his story. And then, there's another one where an individual was on a 2-story PIC module, and you are supposed to have fall protection. And he just went up to do some inventory, and he fell, and he fell 2 stories. And because he had been in the military, he knew enough to kind of flip around instead of landing on his head, which would have killed him, to land on his legs. But when he blew out both knees and legs, and he was out of work for the better part of 3.5 years, many reconstructive surgeries. He is back to work today and full time, and he will be the first one to call people out. He's the person I would say is, your safety is my safety. And if I see you doing something that I know you can learn from, I'm going to tell you. And I don't care if you like me or not, because I don't want you to be in the situation I was, where my family had to take care of me. They had to wait on me. I couldn't, move. I was in the hospital, and he had young kids as well. So when they tell their story, it is so impactful. And I could go on. There's so many of these types of stories over the years.
Do you see safety and compliance as having a relationship?
I think that compliance is like the bare minimum the regulatory agencies will accept for basic safety programs. So if you're only going to shoot for compliance, then you often miss the mark. And as we talked about, the employees don't understand the why. The message is often lost on the guise of authority and mistrust, because you're just telling them to do it because you need to be compliant, not why these regulations are in place and why it's a compliance thing, right? The regulation happened for a reason, hence we have to be compliant with it. And so I think if you understand the why, and if the employee ultimately believes you care, to be honest with you, and you gain their trust, then all of a sudden it becomes something that they want to do, not just something they need to do. And so you might achieve compliance, but you might also develop a culture of safety, which is what the end goal is.
Do you ever find anybody that just isn't buying it?
All the time. You have to be relentless. Didn't we cover that already? Yeah, because there are people who don't see it, but you can't give up, because eventually there's going to be something that happens in that person's life, or in the life of a coworker or a family member, or some example that you give them is going to hit home with them. It takes time to erode that shell, if you will, the fear, because I think depending on where people come from, and obviously not all of our workers started at Southern Glazer, but depending on where they came from and how they were treated, there's sometimes a wall, and there's a mistrust of leadership. And once you gain that trust, you start breaking down that barrier.
You're a fairly senior executive at Southern Glazers. How do you get your peer group to appreciate what safety is bringing to the company?
I don't think in general I have people not understanding. I think it's again, opening the lines of communications, because I think not everybody understands it at first. And I think that you need to have an education program for all levels of the leadership. I think what I've seen as one of the challenges is that sometimes you have individual contributors who are excellent at their job and top performers, and they get promoted to a leadership position, but they've never been a leader before and they don't have the confidence that it takes to do some of the things in that role. I think all companies have a challenge with that and making sure that they get people the right training to be people leaders. Some people are really good at it and some people need a little more coaching. But I think it's those individuals that then don't feel comfortable with their own knowledge of safety and some of the compliance things or what the company expectation is, and they might be able to speak about it, but they don't feel comfortable, for instance, coaching an employee or correcting a behavior because they don't have their own confidence. And so I think you have to develop education sessions, have some, lunchroom conversations about things just to reinforce the messaging so people feel comfortable asking questions they might know or not feel comfortable about. And then develop your programs to where you have a training for supervisors and managers that's different than the ones that the employees get.
How involved are the frontline employees, the drivers, the employees working in the warehouse? How involved are they in developing safety programs?
They are actively involved in every location in developing the safety programs. We have safety committees at the majority of our locations. Every function is represented: drivers, warehouse, sales, leadership. I think every employee at every level needs to be involved in the safety programs and the decisions and the changes, or you're not going to be successful.
Let's talk a bit about EHS, environmental health and safety, and business continuity. You said at the start of our conversation that you lead both efforts for the company. So how do you see the relationship between these two functions?
I think that business continuity, security, safety, we all have to work together. The ultimate goal is to protect the people, our products, the facilities, and the reputation of the company. But honestly, it takes a village. The functions of security and business continuity both have a very large embedded safety component. I know it sounds intuitive, but security and safety have to work hand in hand to implement the programs to ensure we're protecting all of those assets. And then similarly, business continuity focuses on the business remaining open and redundancy for unforeseen business interruptions. So they must also collaborate with the safety resources in the development of site-specific emergency action plans, the response and recovery plans. It's also our collective responsibility to get accountability for every one of our Southern Glazer's employees. So with nearly 20,000 employees across the nation, it's an ongoing collaborative effort between safety, security, and business continuity to do our best to protect everything at this company.
Is safety a competitive advantage for Southern Glazers?
I think we'd like it to be. I think that I have buy-in from the top leadership. They want to be seen as a leader in safety. And as we're seeing the new groups of people that we're hiring in, they're looking for companies that are differentiating in things like sustainability and employee safety. I mean, they want to know that they're going to go to work for a company that cares about them, that has flexible work schedules, potentially working from home options, being good neighbors in their communities, looking at sustainability programs, including electric vehicles, solar panels, things like that, which we are as a company doing. But I mean, the bottom line is that Southern Glazers wants to be seen not only as a leader in beverage alcohol distribution, but we want to be seen as a leader in environmental health and safety. And we are striving for a zero injury workplace. And that is the message I deliver every time I have the opportunity.
You've described an approach to safety that's very focused on people. So how does that translate into metrics? How are you measuring and reporting on the effectiveness of your safety programs?
We use a lot of different metrics to track our safety program, from the typical lagging metrics like recordable injuries with regard to OSHA, claims management, environmental incidents, near misses, things like that. But we're trying to focus on employee behaviors and performance and engaging the people in the response to safety programs. So in order to do that, we put a program in place, kind of like if you went to one of your local eateries and you have an option to pick a soup and salad, right? We've put a program out there where you can pick two, but it's participation. So we want everybody's participation in developing the safety programs that are going to work for each individual facility, as well as engage the employees at all levels of the organization. So for those kinds of metrics, we're looking for safety committees and engaging those workers in housekeeping of different departments, potentially developing a green team, some initiatives around recycling, depending on the people and their passion and how they feel like they can contribute to the program. And then you'll be surprised. I mean, it's the people that are on the front line and the ones that are actually doing the work that come up with the best suggestions about what we can do. And so we track a lot of the typical metrics kind of because you have to, but we're also looking at engagement and participation. And those are the metrics that we track that we feel are really moving the programs forward.
Have you been able to track the impact all the way through to things like productivity improvements?
Yeah, for sure. When the employees feel engaged and they feel like they have some influence over the end result, they're a more productive workforce.
What about cost? How important is cost in the decision making for either bringing in new solutions related to safety or just the overall program?
I think cost is obviously a contributing factor. Obviously, the bottom line drives most activity. And so you have to figure out a way to sell what the programs are or what the changes are or what the cost effectiveness is using the terms that you would in business. So then it's really important for safety professionals to understand what drives their business and to speak the language of the leadership team versus trying to teach them our language, which is a little bit less familiar. And so that you can put it in terms that they understand and can see what their return on investment is. And I think for the most part, at least in my business, if you explain the why and they can understand it in their terms, it's a no-brainer for them. Generally, they open the pocketbook.
Sometimes it takes a really devastating tragedy for a company to implement changes in their operations to improve the safety of their workforce. But can, or rather should, employees be more proactive when it comes to safety? Are there any early warnings or indicators that they should be looking for?
Definitely, you don't want to be in that situation to where it takes that devastating experience to understand or appreciate the programs that you should put in place or should have put in place. If you track near misses, if you can get people to, again, before something happens, they recognize that the standard operating procedure is not following, that they have to have a workaround and they're not able to complete the task as written. Or if you can get the employees to engage them in your committee meetings, openly discuss what your plans are. I mean, I think communication is the way to do it. And unfortunately, there are times, and I think for everyone who is passionate about safety, there has been some triggering event that was an aha moment for them. And I think that when you have leaders that have had that unfortunate experience, they are often more engaged than those who aren't and who might not appreciate it. And you see a lot of safety professionals trying to say, oh, but this could happen, but many leaders don't recognize that it could. The good leaders lead by example and understand the implications as a total business impact, not reputation and such, not focused on compliance as much as the fines that you might get. If you can get employees to share their injury that they had on the job and they're still working for us, and you put that out there for everyone else to see, then I think people recognize, oh, I'm in that same job. I guess that could happen to me. And you get a little bit more people talking about it.
What's the biggest mistake you've ever made?
That is a tough question because I have made many mistakes early in my career, and I've learned so much over the years, but I still learn every single day, requiring me to detect and correct my own things, right, so to speak, on a routine basis. But I think if I reflect, one of the biggest learning opportunities as a new leader in safety was the company had merged and acquired multiple entities over the years. And we were asked by new leadership to standardize our EHS policies and procedures across all the businesses. And I knew how busy the sites were, and I had a team of 5. And so I assigned the 35 standards encompassing the OSHA, NRC, the EPA regulations to my corporate team for development. In fact, the bonuses and their goals were tied to completion of this assignment. And so by the end of the year, I was so proud of my team that they had created these policies and they had a plan for rolling out approximately 2 a month. And like I was just like rubber stamp, yay, we're done, right? It wasn't until the following year when I tasked myself with visiting the vast majority of 65 locations across the globe that I realized many of those policies could not be implemented as written. So, one issue was that they were U.S.-centric because we hadn't taken into account the variances in some of the country regulations or some of the local licenses, for production. The other issue was that even though some sites were manufacturing the same products, their actual steps were not the same. They were vastly different. And so in some cases, because they differed so much, the steps that my team had put into this SOP introduced more hazards to the worker, which was like not the intent at all, right? And it was a brand new document control system. So, the new document control process we put in place to monitor these 35 SOPs or standards, whatever you want to call them, to make a revision was so cumbersome that it was easier for the workers to basically implement a workaround locally than to request a change to the procedure through the corporate channels. So the failure was that we did not engage the worker. The actual person doing the job who knows the process better than anyone. That is how I learned how critical it was to engage the workforce to determine the best safety solutions of what you're trying to get accomplished. And generally, they will tell you everything because they're not signing up to hurt themselves. They want to do the best job for the company in the most efficient way possible. But if you can come to a way to do it more safely that doesn't impact their production, if you will, they're happy to do it. And so that was a huge learning opportunity, which is, if you go back to where you asked me about are the drivers and warehouse people involved in the safety program, that's how I learned that don't put anything out there that has not been either created by, vetted by, collaborated with those people, and make sure that you get their buy-in before you put it out everywhere.
That sounds like an expensive lesson. How the heck did you overcome that?
So all of those things were scrapped. And the next year, we identified what I would say were the industry experts. So we took those 35 things and said, okay, instead of my team developing the plan, I had my team as a team leader, but they were more like a project manager. And the RSOs at those facilities got together on a routine basis to review and document and make sure that everything that was in there could work at every location. And that's how we did every single one of them. We identified who were the experts that we could rely on to vet it at their own location to make sure that it would work.
Good leaders lead by example. They understand the full business implications of their actions. Kay Yoder embraces that in her leadership style and fosters that mindset across the organization. By engaging employees in the development and communication of safety initiatives, she's ensuring her program's success. She learned an expensive lesson not to put anything out there that hasn't been created by, vetted by, collaborated with, or bought into by the people who are ultimately charged with carrying out the tasks. Her relentless approach to safety is the embodiment of Southern Glazer's commitment to provide a safe working environment for employees, contractors, vendors, and customers. And the results stand for themselves, showing up not just in the obvious metrics, but in the behaviors and attitudes of the workers. When an employee shares their own experiences with their peers, they become the safety leader, and your safety program goes from great to the best it can be. This is Kathleen Fanato from TRUCE Software. Join me again as I talk to safety leaders across a wide range of industries to understand how what drives them in their field is also driving the success of their companies. It's no accident.